Throughout the lands occupied by the German army during the Second World War, there was large-scale suffering. Many people were starving and civilian populations were being deported en masse to concentration and extermination camps. The cost of the war was devastating to people living in lands where the conflict came to their doorstep, and many people were forced out of their homes and suffered as their family members were killed. Executions occurred inside occupied towns and cities to send a strong message to the people living there. If someone was suspected of being a member of the resistance, they were arrested by the Gestapo and brutally tortured before they were then executed in front of large crowds. But women suffered heavily at the hands of the Wehrmacht and German forces. They saw them as fair game, and many women were executed by the Einsatzgruppen in the Soviet Union, and many more suffered at the hands of the German army. Some women, to survive in France, even slept with German officers to guarantee food and better treatment for themselves. However, many women were kidnapped and abducted from their homes by the German military. Join us today as we look at the horrific torture of the women of the German military cat houses. And remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. The German army set up many military brothels and cat houses in many different areas across the Second World War. When they arrived in new towns and areas, they created brothels for many of the soldiers to attend. However, these houses were then staffed by many different women and girls who had been rounded up and kidnapped from different lands. Often hotels and other large houses which had been captured were used for this purpose, and around 500 military brothels were set up in German-occupied Europe. Many German officers utilised ones that had already been established. For example, in Paris there were a number of brothels which were staffed by French girls. The German officers saw Paris as a place which was very exotic, and they would often visit these houses, and later, as the war turned against the Germans, the French population punished a number of these women. They were in Paris, for example, forced to undergo the ugly carnival, a form of public humiliation where they had their heads shaved, and in Paris a number of women who slept with the German soldiers were actually killed. But in Eastern Europe and across occupied lands, many teenage girls and women were kidnapped on the streets of occupied cities, and during these roundups they were forced to then work inside of these brothels. The Germans even used female prisoners inside of concentration camps to staff these houses. It was said by the Polish government in exile on the 3rd of May 1941 that inside of Polish cities, mass kidnapping raids with the aim of capturing young women to be sold into slavery in the brothels was occurring at the hands of the Wehrmacht. Polish girls as young as 15 were being shipped to Germany to be then used by the German men, and in Brandenburg it was noted that 2 Polish teenagers who had returned home to Krakow had been made pregnant after being brutally assaulted by German soldiers. These kidnappings occurred still in Warsaw, and it was said that uniformed Germans gazed fixedly at women and girls between the age of 15 and 25. One of the soldiers pulls out a pocket flashlight and shines it on one of the women, straight into their eyes. The 2 women turn their pale faces to us, expressing weariness and resignation. The first one is about 30 years old. "What is his old something looking for around here?" One of the 3 soldiers laughs. "Bread, sir," asks a woman. "A kick in the backside is what you get, not bread," asks the soldiers. The owner of the flashlight directs the light again on the faces and bodies of the girls. The youngest is maybe 15. "This one is ideal," he says. Often many of these young women who were forced into this line of work would be killed at the hands of the German soldiers they had to sleep with, and many also died from diseases they contracted from them. Also, many of the German officers violently killed the women, but following Operation Barbarossa, the practice of German military brothels continued. It was said that the women in the Soviet Union were being captured and kidnapped, and one report stated that, in the city of Smolensk, the German command opened a brothel for officers in one of the hotels, into which hundreds of women and girls were driven. They were mercilessly dragged down the streets by their arms and hair. It was true horror, as these women had to contend also with that many of their homes had been burned down and destroyed, as well as their husbands and family members had been shot dead by the Einsatzgruppen in large-scale atrocities. The Germans gutted certain areas of the Soviet Union, and these women were then forced into slavery in these houses. There were a number of cases where women who had been forced to work in this manner did try to escape. They tried to escape, but often if they were captured, they would just be shot in the same manner that people were if they escaped concentration camps. There was one case where a group of Polish and Soviet women imprisoned inside a German military brothel in Norway escaped in 1941. Inside this house they had been assaulted by up to 32 men a day, and visiting soldiers paid free Reichmarks for 15 minutes between the hours of 2 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. Many of the women who became pregnant were released, but they refused to go back to their families as they were ashamed that they were carrying the babies of the enemy. Those specific women from the Norwegian house who managed to escape found refuge in a local church, which granted them asylum and shelter. But a number of the women could not live with themselves because of their ordeals, and many women took their own lives as they were living a true hell. In occupied France, the Wehrmacht utilised around 100 new brothels inside of the land, and they also used many different former government-controlled ones in cities as mentioned such as Paris. The soldiers were granted official permission for a visitation card issued by the Oberkommando das Heers, which allowed them to sleep with the women in the cat houses. They tried to discourage soldiers from engaging in relations with other French women, and it was said that the brothels were used heavily to try and prevent assault against French women, and many of the women were subjected to regular medical screening to prevent disease spreading throughout the whole of the Wehrmacht. After the war, many of these poor women and females who had been working in these houses tried to make their way home, but what they came back to was homelessness, as their property had been destroyed or sold on, or other people were simply living in it. Many others also had to contend with the fact their family members had been killed and also displaced. But the German military brothels were seen as an untold war crime of the Second World War, with these women forced to staff these, being kidnapped from their homes and being transported to work in these, hundreds of miles away from an area that they were familiar with. These women, in a sense, were some of the forgotten victims of the Second World War, and their stories have been lost to time, but they certainly deserve to be told. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.